My parents gave my brother $100,000 to buy his dream house. When I asked for a little help, they told me to figure it out. Those 3 words burned into my mind. I remember standing there, holding my coffee cup, trying to smile while my brother Trent waved the check in the air like he'd won the lottery. My parents looked so proud of him. My mom even said, "He deserves a good start." I wanted to ask what I deserved, but the words never came out. It wasn't jealousy. It was the kind of hurt that settles deep in your chest, the kind that reminds you of every time you were the one who held things together. Growing up, I was the responsible one. When Dad lost his job, I picked up shifts after school to help pay for groceries. When Mom got sick one winter, I skipped a college trip to stay home and take care of her. Trent, on the other hand, was the golden boy. He was funny, charming, and good at making excuses. If he failed a class, it was because the teacher didn't like him. If he wrecked the car, it was bad luck. And somehow my parents always believed him. I tried not to keep score, but it got harder every year. I worked 2 jobs through college while Trent dropped out after 1 semester. They paid off his loans, but I had to figure mine out on my own. I remember the night I came home exhausted, hands covered in paint from a shift at the hardware store, and saw my parents helping Trent set up his new gaming room. He'd been too stressed to work lately, so Dad told him to take a break. Now, years later, watching them hand him that check felt like confirmation of everything I'd tried not to believe. They would always choose him. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I gave up, it would never be enough. My mom reached over and patted my hand, saying, "You're smart, honey. You'll figure it out." I nodded, pretending it didn't sting, but inside I felt something shift. That night, I went home to my small apartment and sat in the dark. I thought about all the years I'd carried their expectations, all the times I told myself things would even out someday. Maybe they never would. Maybe it was time I stopped waiting for fairness and started figuring things out my own way. In my 20s, I was always running from one thing to the next: classes, work, bills. I didn't have time to rest. Every dollar I made was already promised to something: rent, tuition, groceries. When my dad lost his job for a few months, I helped pay the electric bill. I didn't think twice about it. That's just what you do for family, right? But no one ever said thank you. They acted like it was expected, like I was just doing what I was supposed to do. Meanwhile, Trent was chasing one idea after another. One month, he wanted to start a car detailing business. Then it was selling sneakers online. Then he talked about opening a food truck. None of it ever worked out. He'd borrow money, get bored, and move on. My parents would shake their heads and call him a dreamer. They said he just needed time to find himself. I remember thinking how nice it must be to have that kind of freedom, to fail without fear. There were days I came home from class after a 10-hour shift, too tired to even eat. My phone would buzz with pictures from Mom, Trent grilling burgers in the backyard, my parents laughing beside him. "He's doing great," she'd write. I'd smile at the screen, then go back to studying under a flickering light bulb I couldn't afford to replace. One night, they invited me over for dinner. I thought maybe we'd finally talk, maybe they'd ask how I was doing. Instead, I sat there listening while they praised Trent for being ambitious. My mom said, "He's always thinking big. You can't teach that kind of vision." My dad nodded like Trent had built a company instead of running another idea into the ground. I mentioned my promotion at work, how I'd been made assistant manager after only a year, but no one seemed to hear me. They just kept talking about Trent's next big thing. I sat there, smiling tightly, cutting my chicken into tiny pieces I didn't want to eat. The sound of their laughter filled the room, warm and proud. I looked at my brother, carefree and smug, and I realized something. No matter what I achieved, they'd never see me the same way. That night, the hurt settled deeper. I didn't cry or argue. I just listened, memorizing every word, every dismissive glance. That's when resentment started to take root, quiet but sharp, like a splinter I couldn't pull out. When Trent bought his new house, my parents acted like it was a family achievement. My mom sent a group text with pictures before I even knew what was happening. Trent smiling in front of a big white house with a red door. The message said, "Our boy finally has a home. So proud of him." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying with a simple congratulations. A week later, Trent invited everyone over for a housewarming dinner. I didn't want to go, but my mom insisted. "It's family," she said. So I showed up, holding a cheap bottle of wine I could barely afford, feeling out of place before I even stepped inside. The house smelled new, like fresh paint and expensive candles. Everything looked perfect: brand new furniture, shiny appliances, a backyard big enough for barbecues. Trent walked around like he was giving a tour of a mansion. My parents were glowing with pride. My mom ran her hand along the kitchen counters and said, "This is what we've always dreamed of. Our family legacy." My dad nodded, adding, "It's good to see one of our kids settled." I smiled and nodded, pretending I didn't hear the sting in that sentence. Dinner was loud and cheerful. My mom kept saying how lucky Trent was to have such a nice place at his age. My dad talked about how Trent was doing so well. Nobody asked me about my work or my apartment or anything about my life. I just sat there, pushing food around my plate, pretending it didn't bother me. Every time they laughed, I felt smaller. When it was time to leave, I helped clean up while they opened another bottle of wine. On my way to the living room, I heard my parents talking in the kitchen. My dad's voice was low but clear. "I'm proud of Trent," he said. "He's really settled down. Elena's still renting, still single, always chasing something." My mom sighed. "She's independent, but she needs to start thinking about her future." Something inside me broke. I stood there, hidden behind the doorway, hands trembling. I wanted to walk in and scream, tell them how hard I'd worked for every dollar, how none of this came easy. But I didn't. I just walked out quietly, past their laughter, past Trent's perfect house. That night, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. I wasn't angry anymore, just empty. I realized I was done being the good daughter, done trying to earn their approval. From that moment on, I decided they'd never see me beg for anything again. After that night, I stopped visiting as often. I told my parents I was busy with work, which wasn't a lie. I threw myself into my job as a property appraiser and made it my whole world. I started paying attention to every detail: how houses were valued, what made prices rise, what neighborhoods were changing. While other people talked about vacations or dating, I studied housing reports and watched markets shift. I stopped sharing much about my life. When my mom called, I kept the conversations short. I didn't mention my long hours or the extra projects I took on. If she asked how I was doing, I just said, "I'm fine." The less they knew, the better. I wanted space to build something for myself without their opinions or backhanded comments. Every paycheck, I set aside money, sometimes just a little, but I made sure to save. I stopped going out, stopped buying things I didn't need. My apartment was small and plain, but it was mine. I liked coming home, closing the door, and knowing everything in that space was paid for by me alone. There was something peaceful about that. A few months later, Trent called me out of nowhere. He said he wanted some advice about his house. I almost laughed. Suddenly, the sister who was still renting was good enough to ask for help. He talked about adding a deck, maybe redoing the kitchen. I listened, keeping my voice calm, professional. I told him what upgrades actually added value, and which ones were a waste of money. He sounded surprised that I knew so much. On the surface, I helped him like a good sister should. But inside, I felt something different, quiet satisfaction. I realized how much I'd learned, how much stronger I'd become without them noticing. Trent had been handed everything, and he still needed help. I'd been given nothing, and I was building knowledge that could change my life. After that call, I started making real plans. I looked at foreclosure listings, rundown homes that others ignored. I ran numbers late into the night, figuring out what I could afford, how much I could fix on my own. I didn't tell a soul. It wasn't revenge yet, not exactly. It was focus. I wanted to succeed quietly, to build something solid while they kept underestimating me. They thought I was drifting, but I was just getting ready. A year later, I bought my first house. It wasn't much to look at. A small, beat-up place on the edge of town with broken windows and peeling paint. Most people would have walked away, but I saw something in it. It was all I could afford, and I was determined to make it work. I signed the papers with shaking hands, knowing every dollar I had was now tied to that crumbling little house. The first few months were rough. After work, I'd drive straight there, change into old clothes, and start cleaning, painting, fixing whatever I could on my own. I watched videos, read guides, and learned how to do things I'd never done before. Some nights I worked past midnight, hands blistered, back sore, but I didn't care. Every small change, every wall painted, every floorboard replaced, felt like proof that I could build something from nothing. When it was finally ready to sell, I listed it with no big hopes. But the market was better than I expected. The house sold for almost double what I paid. I remember sitting at my kitchen table staring at the check, not believing it was real. For the first time in my life, I felt powerful. No one had given me a thing, and yet here I was, winning quietly. I didn't tell my parents or Trent. When my mom called, she still talked like I was barely scraping by. She told me to be careful, to save more, to not waste money on rent. I let her talk. I didn't correct her. There was a strange comfort in their ignorance. The less they knew, the better it felt. With the money I made, I bought another property, but this time under a small company name I created. No one could trace it back to me easily. It became my secret project. I kept working my regular job, pretending everything was the same, but inside, I was building something bigger. Every deal, every renovation, every quiet success added to my confidence. Years went by, and they still thought I was just getting by. I could have told them, could have bragged, but I didn't. The truth was, their low expectations fueled me. Every time my mom said, "You'll figure it out someday," I smiled to myself. I already had. They just didn't know it yet. It started with a phone call from my mom. Her voice sounded shaky, the kind she used when something bad happened. She said Trent was having a rough time and needed help. I didn't say anything at first, just listened. Apparently, he had taken out a second mortgage on his house to start some kind of backyard business. Something about building custom furniture. He borrowed money, bought tools, and even hired a few friends to help. But the business never took off. Orders didn't come in, and the bank was now threatening foreclosure. I could almost picture the mess. Trent had always jumped into things without a plan. He loved the idea of being his own boss, but never thought about what would happen if it failed. My parents sounded panicked. They said they were trying to help him, but money was tight. They'd already sold part of their retirement savings, and it still wasn't enough to cover what Trent owed. Then my mom asked the question I knew was coming. "Honey, do you think you could lend your brother a little, just until he gets back on his feet?" For a moment, I didn't answer. My heart was pounding. It felt like all the years of being overlooked, all the moments they brushed me aside, were pressing down on me at once. I wanted to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat. They had given him $100,000 without blinking. Now they were asking me, the one they told to figure it out, to clean up his mess. I asked how much he needed. My dad said, "Not a lot, maybe 50,000. Just until things settle." He said it so casually, like that kind of money was nothing. I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. They didn't ask if I could afford it. They just assumed I'd help. I told them I'd think about it. My mom sighed in relief, already thanking me before I'd agreed. When I hung up, I sat in silence, staring at the wall. My hands were shaking, not from anger this time, but from something colder, clarity. For years, I'd stayed quiet, built my own life in the shadows. Now they needed me, and I finally had the power they'd never believed I could have. I didn't know what I'd tell them yet, but one thing was certain. I wasn't the same girl they once dismissed. A few days later, I called my parents and told them to come over so we could talk about Trent's situation. My mom sounded relieved, thinking I was going to help. "Oh, thank you, honey," she said. "You've always been so responsible." I smiled to myself as I hung up. They had no idea where I lived now or what my life really looked like. When they pulled up, I watched from the window as their car slowed down. I could see the confusion on their faces. My home wasn't some small apartment like they imagined. It was a bright, remodeled house with a neat garden and a new driveway. My dad looked around as he got out, frowning slightly, probably wondering if they had the right address. I opened the door and welcomed them in. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air. My living room was warm and quiet, sunlight spilling over the polished wood floors. Everything was clean and modern, but not loud or flashy, just carefully chosen. My mom's eyes moved from the art on the wall to the large espresso machine on the counter. "You've really made this place nice," she said softly. I smiled and handed them their cups. "It's just a little place I've been fixing up," I said. My dad looked around again, clearly trying to understand. He finally asked, "When did you move here?" "Oh, about 2 years ago," I said casually. "It was one of my projects." I didn't explain more. I just watched as they tried to make sense of it. We sat at the table, and my dad finally brought up Trent. He talked about the money, how they were worried, how they hoped I could lend something to help him out. I listened quietly, nodded a few times, then took a slow sip of coffee. "I wish I could," I said calmly, "but I can't really afford to give away that kind of money right now." They both looked shocked. My mom blinked and said, "But you seem to be doing fine." I smiled again. "I manage. Between this house, my 3 rentals, and my savings account, things are steady, but I have to be careful." The room went completely silent. My dad's jaw tightened. My mom stared at me like she hadn't heard right. I didn't gloat or explain. I just let the quiet fill the space. For the first time, I was the one holding the power, and they finally saw me as I really was. The silence hung in the air until my mom finally spoke. Her voice was sharp, trembling a little. "I can't believe what I'm hearing," she said. "After everything we've done for you, you're just going to sit there and refuse to help your own brother?" I stayed calm, watching her face. "I'm not refusing to help," I said slowly. "I'm just not fixing something that isn't my problem." She scoffed. "That's cold, Elena. You've changed. You used to be so grateful." My dad leaned forward, his tone softer but full of guilt. "We did our best, honey. Maybe it wasn't perfect, but we always tried to support you." Those words hit harder than I expected. For a moment, I wanted to laugh. Support? I thought of the years I spent working double shifts, paying my own tuition, skipping meals just to save a few dollars. I thought of that day they handed Trent $100,000 and told me to figure it out. I took a breath and looked at them both. "You're right," I said quietly. "You did tell me to figure it out." And I did. Alone. My mom's mouth opened, but no words came out. I kept talking, my voice steady but sharp. "You helped Trent when he didn't need it. You rewarded him for failing, and you punished me for surviving. Every time I worked hard, it meant nothing. But every time he stumbled, you called him brave." Trent shifted in his seat, his eyes darting between us. "Elena, come on," he said, trying to sound calm. "We're family. Don't make this about old stuff." I turned to him. "Old stuff? You took $100,000 and blew it. Now you want me to clean up the mess. You had a safety net your whole life, Trent. I didn't. If you want another bailout, maybe ask the same people who handed you everything while I ate ramen for dinner." No one spoke after that. My dad's face turned red, and my mom looked like she was about to cry. But I didn't move to comfort them. For once, I didn't owe anyone anything. I stood up and opened the front door. "I think we're done here," I said simply. My voice didn't shake. They stared at me, waiting for me to take it back, but I didn't. Eventually, they stood and left. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and the house fell silent again. The days after that meeting were quiet. No phone calls, no messages, nothing. At first, I thought my mom would call to argue again, but she didn't. My dad stayed silent too. The house felt peaceful, though sometimes the quiet reminded me of how final everything had become. I wasn't angry anymore. I just didn't feel the need to chase after them. A few weeks passed before I heard anything about Trent. A neighbor from my old street mentioned it by accident. His house had been repossessed. The bank took it back after he missed too many payments. I didn't feel happy about it, but I didn't feel sorry either. He'd had every chance to do things right, and he'd thrown it away. Maybe losing that house was the only thing that would make him face reality. Not long after that, people in town started to notice the truth. I wasn't the struggling sister anymore. Word got out that I owned several properties, that I'd built everything on my own. Old neighbors who used to look at me with pity now treated me differently. Polite smiles, respectful tones. I didn't brag or talk about my success, but the change in how they saw me was impossible to miss. I went about my days quietly, managing my work, checking on my rentals, keeping to myself. Sometimes, I thought about my family and wondered if they ever realized how much they had pushed me away. But I never reached out. I had learned that peace comes from distance, not from begging people to see your worth. One evening, just as the sun was setting, I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, my father was standing there. He looked older, smaller somehow, like the years had finally caught up to him. He didn't speak for a moment, just looked around my home with tired eyes. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly. "I thought you'd always need help. I didn't see what you were capable of." I listened, but I didn't answer right away. There was a time when those words would have meant everything to me. Now they felt too late. I nodded politely and said, "I figured it out, remember?" He gave a weak smile and nodded back. When he left, I closed the door softly behind him. I didn't feel angry or proud, just free. Years passed, and life settled into something calm and steady. I spent my days working with people who actually listened, helping young women who wanted to buy their first homes. I shared what I had learned, the small mistakes, the smart choices, the patience it took to build something real. It felt good to give advice without being judged or compared. My world was quiet now, but it was mine completely. I had my own office downtown, bright and simple, with a window that looked out onto the busy street. I liked hearing the city outside, knowing I had carved my own place in it. I didn't think about my family much anymore. The last I'd heard, Trent had moved to another town and was trying to start over again. My parents never called. I assumed they were still helping him when they could. I had made peace with it. Some people never change, and I no longer needed them to. One afternoon, a letter arrived from a law firm. The envelope had my parents' names printed in small black letters. I knew what it meant before I opened it. They had both passed away a few weeks earlier. For a moment, I just sat there, the paper heavy in my hands. Then I unfolded the letter and read through the words carefully. It said their remaining assets, what little was left, had been left entirely to Trent. Not a single mention of me. For a second, I expected that old familiar sting, the one that used to come whenever I realized how deep their favoritism ran. But it didn't hurt this time. I felt nothing. Then I smiled, a small, quiet smile. Of course they left everything to him. They had always done that. And it was fine. I didn't need what they had built. I had built my own life from the ground up. Every wall, every floor, every bit of it came from my own effort. I folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and put it in a drawer. Then I stood up, turned off the lights in my office, and locked the door behind me. The evening sun hit my face as I stepped outside. The air was warm, and for the first time, I felt completely free. No anger, no sadness, just peace. I had figured it out after all, and that was enough. Do you think Elena made the right choice by walking away from her family, or should she have forgiven them and started over? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories like this. Do you think Elena made the right choice by walking away from her family, or should she have forgiven them and started over? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories like this.